So welcome everybody to today's webinar. I am joined by Amy Carrico, Director of Fuel Services and Technical Standards at Airlines for America, otherwise known as the head lady in charge of the ATA 103, and also by Rob G, Global Business Development Manager for Parker Velcon's Aerospace Filtration Division. Welcome Amy and welcome Rob.
Thanks, nice to be here.
All right. Good deal. So this has kind of been a long time coming. For those of us on the webinar, I'd like to think most people are aware of what we, collectively come to know as the monitor filter issue. But in case you're not, thought we'd start with a little bit of background on what that issue is and what has led us to this replacement filtration technology. So since 2010, there have been at least 8 documented incidents of SAP, or super absorbent polymers, being found downstream in aircraft engine components and fuel systems. So what SAP is, it's the media that makes up monitor filters. It's what makes it swell shut when water hits it, sort of like a diaper, if you will. Obviously, when filters are adding to contaminants and not removing them, that's a problem. So the industry took it very, very seriously. And in 2017, IATA, the International Air Transport Association, put together a working group composed of folks from the EI, the Energy Institute, A4A, the filter people, pretty much everybody involved in fuel filtration and fuel handling came together and essentially elected to say, we've got to get rid of monitor filters, right? Ultimately, we are going to be phasing them out of existence. No questions about it. But that's a pretty big undertaking because monitor filters have been around for decades. They're pretty much ubiquitous. They're in almost every into-plane fueling operation around the country and around the world, not only commercial, but also general aviation, avgas, jet fuel applications, pretty much everywhere. And then that's kind of led us down this path to developing a new technology and ending up where we are today. So Amy, I want to kick it over to you for a little bit, maybe to add some color or some detail to what we just covered on the monitor filter history, and we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think you've covered it pretty well. You've hit the highlights. What we did discover, through extensive research is that no matter the operating conditions, that there are certain within normal operating conditions, circumstances in which you could have the SAP leave the filter monitor. It didn't matter which manufacturer, where you were in the world, what type of fuel you were using. And that's really the thing that led us to, okay, no matter what, we've got to get rid of these things. It's a big undertaking. Our estimates going into this was about 85% worldwide of fueling operations take place through a filter monitor, and the vast majority of those are through a 2-inch or a 5-inch format, something that's not going to be easily adaptable to a filter water separator, which was the only other filtration technology available to us at the time. And so that led us to put our heads together on, what are we going to do? No one had introduced a new filtration technology to into-plane filtration in going on 40-ish years, give or take. So we said, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do to take a look at what available options are to us. And kudos to the filter manufacturers who all came with various solutions for us to take a look at. And so we've been evaluating those as they've been ready for us to evaluate. And when we feel like they're ready and fit for purpose, we're including those in the ATA 103. So the water barrier is now the second replacement filtration technology that we've got for filter monitors in a 2-inch format, which is kind of the key thing that we've been looking for. Right? Something that's going to help us with those 2-inch format vessels being able to convert over to something that doesn't contain SAP.
And the primary driver behind that was really size, right? Being able to get the performance and flow rates that we need into vessels that are historic or that much smaller than a filter water separator. They're just, filter water separators are just a much larger unit especially on hydrant carts and things like that, where you have these small footprints. We needed to kind of figure out a solution. And when I say we, that's when we placed it in the lap of Rob and the team at Parker Velcon, and also Facet and Foudy and all the other filter folks that came out and are working on and have provided solutions. So Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us pretty much, what we're here to learn, right? I mean, what are water barrier filters? How do they work? What does the audience need to know?
No, thank you, Steve, and appreciate that. As Amy said, it was quite the undertaking for the filter manufacturers to develop a replacement for the SAP, the super absorbent polymer monitor cartridge. And Parker Velcon took the stance where we knew it was going to be critical to have a drop-in replacement in order to have this phase out happen sooner than later. The only way we can do that and phase out SAP was to have drop-in solutions, and that was our plan. I do have a presentation here that I'll quickly go through just to familiarize everybody what the water barrier filter is. I'm going to show that right now. Okay, so I'll quickly go through this and update. Everybody realizes that the change is coming. We need to phase out the 1583, the prior 1583 SAP monitor specification. The 1588 barrier technology is what we have developed. This is a specification that was written around the 1588 technology by EI. You can see there's quite a bit of list there. We compared the two, the 1588 versus the prior 1583 specification. And you can see a lot of the tests that are required to approve this technology for adoption are similar. However, we did add a couple extra ones, and we removed the ones that are not required because it does not have the water absorbing media. So it will remove, we've removed all the SAP from this technology. It still performs the water slug testing. It still meets the the emulsified water testing, the solids testing, the compatibility testing, and the structural testing. So the performance requirements of the 1588 is as stringent as 1583, only it's without the SAP media. We also tested this media to various other requirement tests for the 1588 specification, which meant we did 400 stop starts. We additized the fuel with a cocktail of additives that passed all the testing. We did a bunch of pull tests on them too. We also overrated the flow on these cartridges to show that these cartridges can still perform even overrated. And we've swamped a vessel with these cartridges for 12 hours. All of that passed the requirements of this robustness testing. As far as what this brings to the commercial and general aviation industry, it is a 2-inch drop-in replacement. If you look at the picture, it looks very similar to the previous 1583 monitor. It's able to remove water and dirt and does not allow any of it to pass, so you get clean, dry fuel without the use of SAP. It meets the current specification for EI, that's the 1588, for both emulsified water and slug water protection. Cost efficient, as a drop-in replacement, we felt it was important to try and make these cartridges feasible so that they can be easily dropped in and removed from the current existing monitors without having to add additional equipment. Again, it's been tested and there's no media included that will allow any media migration, so there's no concerns there. All the materials used in this technology is compatible with the jet fuel and avgas fuel. And the procedure is very simple. The diameter is the same, the lengths are the same, everything that you were seeing with the existing or the previous fuel monitor, it will be exactly the same. It still fits in the same, it still has a no seal, the O-ring, everything is there. The only difference is that these cartridges operate slightly different when it comes to the differential pressure, which I will explain shortly. I have a little video here that demonstrates the water that separates from the fuel by the filter cartridge. Water suspended in the fuel will be collected on the barrier of the cartridge. Water droplets will form and then drop to the bottom of the filter vessel. As you can see, This is 30 parts per million of water that was introduced into the fuel over a 4-hour time lapse. And you can see the water that's collected at the bottom of the vessel. Eventually, that water does need to be removed from the vessel, similar to a filter water separator operation. The monitor housing, everybody is aware. This is the 2-inch monitor housing. It incorporates the 2-inch monitor cartridge, or now the water barrier filter. What's required of this filter vessel, and has been in the standards, most operating standards, is that they do daily sumping of these vessels to ensure you're removing any water or contaminant that's been collected at the bottom of the vessel. That's more crucial now than it was before. Obviously, it's different technology. It's not water absorbing, so water doesn't get trapped into the cartridge. Water gets repelled by the cartridge and drops to the bottom of the vessel. So it's crucial that the water is removed if any water is collected at the bottom. And we offer educational assistance on what to look for and how the operating conditions work with the differential pressure. We put a quick slide together just to show you that differential pressure could come from 2 different areas. It could be solid contaminant differential pressure increase. That is something that happens usually slowly, builds up over time, and traps dirt into the media, and it won't release it. Emulsified water also can cause differential pressure to increase on these cartridges. So you may see water, if water is reduced into the vessel, the differential pressure will increase, and then water is eventually repelled and dropped to the bottom of the vessel. When that water is removed from the vessel, it allows the cartridges to operate freely again, and you don't have that differential pressure build up like you have when water's in there. The water slug is a slug of water that may hit the filter cartridges quickly and hard, and if that happens, usually the differential pressure increases pretty rapidly. And if that happens and the filter vessel, the differential pressure gets to its terminal pressure, then you could remove the water from the bottom of the sump of the vessel. And what could happen is the differential pressure could be relieved, and you could see it lower back to a lower differential pressure reading. That's not to be concerned. Unlike water absorbing cartridges, where the industry was always informed not to, to watch out for water differential pressure that may decrease. That's something that could be an issue with the cartridge. Not the case in this one here. If water is removed from the vessel, if any water is removed from the vessel, the differential pressure may decrease, and then the cartridges will operate at a lower differential pressure. Some of the other filter cartridges that we're producing in this water barrier technology is for our what we call single stage filter housings. These are compact housings that are used throughout the world, really, in the user format. It has a compact housing that takes a single cartridge in it, 5-inch or 6-inch diameter. These cartridges have the same technology. They operate the same way. They're just built to a different design. Again, there's no modifications required to the filter housing. Sumping is still required, and it removes all the water and dirt that may be in the fuel. What we do know is that these cartridges have been tested with the additives that we did in robustness testing, and anti-icing additive, FSI or PRIST as they call it, was tested with this cartridge as well too, this technology, and it did not have any bearing on the filtration performance of the cartridge. So unlike 1583 monitor cartridges that had to go away from pre-blended fuels, this technology will now allow you to use that pre-blended fuel with that anti-icing additive in it, and there is no concerns to the operation. The one thing I want to note on here is that the filter change is at a max of 22 psi. That's the manufacturer's recommendation, 22 psi or a 3-year service life. I've noted that and started at the bottom. Amy will speak on this a little bit more later, but the ATA 103 acceptance of our water barrier technology is limiting the differential pressure to 15 psi or 1-year service. And again, Amy can explain more on that, but that was just recent. Here's some of the cartridges identified in filter housings that take our water barrier filter for the general aviation or the compact filter designs. You can see the various flow rates and different sizes. Again, all approved for jet fuels and avgases, even with fuel containing FSI. The water barrier filter for 5 inches and 6 inch is not in the specification at the moment. The 1588 specification only qualified the 2-inch diameter monitor right now, monitor size. However, there is work with the EI and the industry to develop the 5-inch and 6-inch and have it incorporated into the 1588 specification as well. Addendum is being worked on. There's talk about a proposed 1587 specification that would allow these other various sizes, 2-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch, to be included into the specification acceptance for that 1588 water barrier filter. More to come on that in the weeks ahead. So just to recap, this technology was brought into concept back in 2016. A few years of work on the development. We did qualify it in 1588 in May of 2018. We did various testing on it, robustness testing, electrostatic charge testing. And recently, everybody was aware that we were putting these cartridges in the field trials. We worked with the JIPL, which is A4A, JIG, and IATA. We worked closely with them in monitoring the field trials over the past year and a half. And as Amy stated, this technology has now been adopted and accepted by A4A into the ATA 103 standard. Coincidentally, in Canada here, where I am right now, the standard for aviation fueling at the aerodromes, the B836, has also adopted this water barrier technology, the EI 1588 specification. So it's right now it's in acceptance by both those standards. So that's all I have, Steve. I will
Yeah.
Get out of
No,
presentation.
No, great, Rob. Thank you for putting that together. I kind of wanted to touch on a few takeaways that I pulled from that, and hopefully we can kind of summarize and bring it to the audience. The first one is the difference in how the filters work. So number one, it's in the name, right? Water barrier filter. So instead of absorbing water, it's repelling it, right? That's the comparison's been drawn to Teflon, right? Like water off a duck's back, it's just repelling water. Is it repelling particulate or is it containing particulate?
No, it's the way the cartridge is designed, Steve, is it's a pleated media cartridge.
Okay.
It has very many pleats, which offers a lot of surface area. And the pleats are meant to offer that large area so that it can capture the dirt and contaminant that's in the fuel. So it's not where the dirt, the contaminant is not repelled, it's actually trapped into the media pleats. The water is repelled by the media and allowed to release to the bottom of the vessel.
Good deal. That's one of the questions I've heard floated around a few times, so appreciate you clarifying that. The other big one for me is, and I'm sure for you, and I know for Amy, and they're going to be the hardest thing for us, not hard, but the biggest hurdle for us to kind of communicate is the difference in how we approach differential pressure, right? I mean, for years, DP should only go one way. If it comes down under the same flow rate, you've got a problem. But with this technology, that's really turning that on its head. It is possible to have a spike in DP because you had a slug of water and then you simply drain it off and it should return to its DP before that occurred, or it's starting DP at filter change. Like, is there a threshold where we're concerned about how much of a drop there was under the same flow conditions?
That's a great question, and that's one we get asked quite often. So the way it works, Steve, is the cartridges will be installed into the vessel, and you have an initial differential pressure, and it could be 5, 6, 7 psi. And as long as at that flow rate, the differential pressure never goes below that initial differential pressure, the cartridges are performing as expected. There has been instances we've seen in field trials and even in our lab testing where when water is introduced, water obviously forms as a contaminant and allows the cartridge to start blocking up, and then you get differential pressure increase. Once that water is able to be relaxed and dropped to the bottom of the vessel and removed, then you could see, and we have seen many times, where the differential pressure will now be lowered, be released, and if you've had 6 psi and all of a sudden it jumps to 9 psi and you did find some water in the vessel, if you remove it, you could go back to 6, 7 psi. And there's that 2-3 pounds of drop we've seen. We haven't seen any substantial drops. We haven't seen anything that went from 5 to 16 and then back down to 5. We haven't seen that, but we have seen spikes in the differential pressure throughout the fuelings, various fuelings, and it's usually about 2, 3, 4 psi at max.
So if they were running along at 6 psi, we'll say 200 gallons a minute, they had a spike, they went to 9 psi, 200 gallons a minute, and then they dropped down to like 1 psi after drinking the water at 200 gallons a minute, that is a concern, right? That's still a red flag you'd want to watch out for.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern, Steve, for sure. That means that something has happened or something may have occurred that is allowing a bypass.
So one of the other things that I picked up on, and I'm genuinely curious, is let's say you're at that 6, 200 gallons a minute, we jump to 15, or let's say we're at 11. I don't know. Let me just make up some numbers, and we go to 16. If we then drain the water and go back to 11 or whatever our starting DP was, when we cross that 15 psi threshold, or I'm sorry, 22 psi threshold in, per the filter, 15 per the ATA 103, what does that mean? If we go back to starting, is that okay? Or if, as soon as we and this is kind of a question for both, with you and Rob, Amy, when we cross that threshold, is that no mas? We're just done? We have to pull them and change them? Or are we allowed to go back under to where we were?
Go ahead, Rob. I'll let you answer first from a filter perspective.
I'll let the manufacturer speak on that first. Now, normally, Steve, yeah, we would say it's still acceptable for continued operation. If you hit a trigger at 15 pounds or 22 psi, and we've done this through some of the field trials as well too. And just to confirm that there was no water, so they'll hit that alarm, shut her down. They'll let the truck settle for an hour. If there's water removed, that will explain some of the reasons why the spike in DP. And if they remove the water and go back and operate, and it's now back to 15 pounds from 22, we would say, yeah, you can continue operating that. But if the other way is if you let it settle and you drain it and you don't see water, or there's not much water to be seen, and go back and operate it again and it's still at 22 psi, or 15 psi, then you would say, yeah, the cartridges are consumed, they need to be removed.
So basically, the acceptable, the drop in DP is only acceptable if we're talking water. Number one, you get water out. If it drops, right, but not below its starting, and then if it stays the same at over, 15 if you're following the ATA 103, 22 if you're following the filter manufacturers, then they need to be changed. Talking about change outs, you said, go ahead, Amy, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, actually, I want to be clear from a 103 perspective, and a lot of the operational requirements that we put into the ATA 103 around the water barriers were specifically because we're in this phase out transition period. So we still have filter monitors in operation within the system. And so from an ATA 103 perspective, if you hit 15 psi, no matter what's the reason, even if you've got a water slug, you drain out a ton of water, we don't care. You hit 15, it's a change out, it's done. And that's really protective in case in case you've inadvertently put a filter monitor in there or some other type of filter, and you've got them mixed up. We don't want any chance of, overpressuring a filter monitor and risking having an SAP release type event. And so there's a lot of conservative decisions that were made in this interim period from an ATA 103 perspective. So in the 103, it's very clear. Once you hit 15, even if you know there's water, even if you drain it and the DP drops back down, it doesn't matter. You need to do a full filter change.
Okay. So it sounds like the 15 psi, to your point about this interim decision, was primarily driven by the fact that that's the limit for everything else, and we didn't want to create confusion in the market and kind of stay in this area where it's 15 and that's it until maybe further on down the line it can be reevaluated, but 15 psi is the go, no go, essentially.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's correct.
So Rob touched on field trials. Amy, you were very much involved in the field trial process of getting EI 1588 water barrier filters to this point. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I was saying earlier, it had been, 40 some odd years since we had introduced a new filtration technology in the interplane space for aviation. And so we said, okay, what do we need to actually do to evaluate this? And looking at what had been done historically, that sort of thing. And what we came to is we needed to test these things out both in a laboratory, but also in a controlled way out in the field, right? We needed to fuel some real aircraft, but in a very controlled way where we understood and could collect data to validate that, they were safe and functional in all the different possible operating conditions that you could experience out there. So A4A teamed up with IATA and JIG, the Joint Inspection Group, to put together a set of challenges, if you will, at airports across the globe to see how these things performed in real life. So we took a handful of carts, trucks, refuelers, Bowsers, whatever you want to call them, various different vehicle types, various different operations from a throughput standpoint, from a flow rate standpoint, aircraft standpoint, size, are you seeing big planes or small planes, wide bodies, narrow bodies, regional jets, et cetera. We also looked at weather conditions. So we wanted to make sure we understood, in polar regions versus in tropic regions, depending on your fuel supply chain. Do you receive fuel by, ocean-going tankers or multi-product pipelines, et cetera? So we wanted to make sure we had all the different scenarios covered that these filters could possibly see. And so we selected a number of airports around the world. We fitted these vehicles out with a sophisticated and very extensive suite of sensors to see what was happening in real time and to log all of that data so that we could be confident that not only were the filters doing what they had promised us that they were going to do, but that we were going to be safe and confident that, when operators took them out there in real world conditions, that we weren't going to have any issues, right? Aircraft back pressures, that sort of thing. We wanted to make sure that those are some things that are difficult to simulate in a lab, vibrations on a vehicle as it's running around an airport. And of course, there's no good way to break something than to give it to the guy with the wrench, and he'll tell you how you can break it. So we learned a lot in that process. I think the bottom line is the filters underwent an extensive amount of testing for us to validate and get to this point where we felt very confident that these types of technologies could be brought out into the field in a safe and effective manner.
And that's kind of what brought us to Bulletin 22.1, right? I mean, after years and years of exhaustive research, lab testing, field testing, throwing all the wrenches at it, different variables, environments, climates, here we are. A4A is now accepted into use at locations that operate to the ATA 103 standard water barrier filters. What beyond what we've already covered, what does our audience need to know? I'll just turn it over to you.
Yeah, so for right now in the 103, and again, I'll reiterate, a lot of the decisions from an operational standpoint in terms of limitations for the filter were chosen conservatively because it is a new technology and because we're in this space where we've got such a wide variety of fleet types that are transitioning at different speeds away from SAP technology. And we have this very real risk of SAP from filter monitors that we need to continue to eliminate. And one of the things that we found in the field trial, which I can't stress enough, is how similar a water barrier looks to a filter monitor. So even in our very controlled conditions on the field trial, we had one site that inadvertently put filter monitors into their vessel instead of a water barrier filter because that's how much they look alike. So that's a thing that we wanted to make sure that we were really cognizant of as we went forward from the ATA 103 perspective. So what you'll see is water barriers are accepted in a 2-inch format. We expect once the additional sizes are evaluated by the Energy Institute and incorporated into the specification that those will also go into the ATA 103. But right now it's limited to 2-inch format because that's what's EI qualified, and we stick with whatever's EI qualified from a 103 perspective. The max changeout is 15 PSI or 1 year of service. So that aligns with all the other filter types that we've got out there today. It should be pretty straightforward and simple. When you do a vessel conversion, obviously you need to make sure your data plate's all up to date, and you've got all of your correct labeling, et cetera, completed. We've already talked about from our perspective, if your DP goes up and if your DP goes down and you know you've drained water, that's an acceptable operating condition, and you can continue on operating at the same flow rate as long as you're not going below your startup DP, which is never acceptable for any filter type. Right. Once you hit that 15 PSI limit, though, regardless of the conditions or the reasons why, you need to do a full filter change. The other thing that was implemented in the 103, and this was about the differences between the filters and how difficult they are to tell apart, is a mandatory requirement to store filters in a segregated manner. So if your filter monitors, your water barriers, your dirt defense filters, your coalescers, you need to keep them all separate in your storage facility. So you need to have dedicated spaces, and they can't be right there on the same shelf next to each other. You need to keep them segregated. And this is kind of one of our learnings from DEF contamination instances in terms of best practice. But given the similarities between those types of filters, we want to make sure that excessive caution is being taken here to not have any issues with continuing to have SAP released into aircraft.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to touch on. You know, that segregated storage sounded awfully familiar. It's no matter how much you plan and account for variables, right? Like, I mean, all the details you gave about the different things you considered, somebody might mix them up. I mean, that's a very real possibility. So I guess this one's for you, Rob. How much longer until people can mix them up? How much longer until monitor filters are completely off the market, if ever? I mean, at least for an aviation application.
Well, to touch on the difference between the monitor and the water barrier, we are still working with the industry leaders to try and see what we can do to better identify the difference between the two. Unfortunately, the end caps meet a specification, so they have to be the same end cap. The white outer sleeve is an approved sleeve that doesn't restrict. We've tried different kinds of sleeves, and it doesn't restrict the flue and then cause differential pressure to increase. But we are looking to find ways to try and distinguish between the two so that it makes it easier for the industry. So on that, we continue to move forward on that. As far as how long monitors will still be available, Velcon stance has always been the same. We will continue supplying the SAP monitor as long as they're still acceptable for use. And while we are still working on barrier technology for full adoption. So we can tell you this, Steve, we're probably not turning off the switch tomorrow, but it's on our radar.
I guess it's like anything else. It depends on what the market is demanding, right? And whether or not Amy's group continues to allow it.
Correct. We know there's still a heavy use of monitors out there, and the industry still relies on that monitor to operate and fuel their aircraft. So if there's a need, we will continue, but as soon as that need is void, we will stop making them.
And without getting too far off topic, I feel like I should mention to everybody out there continuing the use of monitors, there are very specific operational procedures in place to ensure that SAP doesn't migrate downstream. Is it Bulletin 2017.1 or 0.2, Amy?
0.1.
Okay. That's available on A4A's website.
0.2. Get it. 2017.2. Yeah.
It's out there. There's like 6 different items. We're not going to go over them here today, but suffice to say, we've got some pretty good controls in place to ensure, we don't have, further incidents like we had with SAP downstream, or at least to mitigate them as much as possible. So Amy, I want to kick it over to you and talk about DP switch activation procedures real quick. What do folks need to know?
So DP switches will remain mandatory for water barriers the way that they are for filter monitors.
Okay.
Again, this is about the ability to inadvertently place a monitor in the vessel still. We know that once you bring, and I can't stress this enough, if you get a monitor above 15 psi, the chances of SAP leaving the filter is exponentially greater.
Right.
And so that's why there's been so much focus around this 15 psi limit and the implementation of DP switches so that you don't inadvertently overpressurize a monitor. So DP switches will remain mandatory from our perspective for all filter types until we are done with SAP. And to be honest, maybe even beyond there, that's a decision that hasn't yet been taken. But for a relatively inexpensive piece of kit, it provides a lot of assurances, both to the airlines and to the operators, to make sure that everything's being operated the way it should be. So there's no changes to your set point on your DP switch. They are still mandatory on all vehicles, regardless of the vehicle types, whether it's a truck or a cart, doesn't matter. You need a DP switch. It's got to be set to 15 psi, and you need procedures in place for reset, right? So some folks opt to use some sort of keyed reset switch where a supervisor has to come over with the key or the code to unlock it. Some folks just have, operational requirements in place that a supervisor has to come off and visually put eyes on it and sign off on it, et cetera. Our philosophy tends to be let you guys decide what's best for your operation, as long as you have some sort of procedure in place for what to do when you hit the DP switch activation. Okay.
So moving on, this is kind of, I guess, a question for both of you. In terms of transitioning, do everything all at once, pick one truck, when the next filter change? What do you guys recommend in terms of moving over from monitors to water barriers? You tell me, is there any best practices that you've seen, from a operational standpoint, a supply standpoint? Like what's the best practice? Should they get used to it on one vehicle first and see, you tell me.
Well, I think, our recommendation for everyone is strongly to take a phased approach when they're doing any sort of transition. The new technology that are coming into place, whether it be a dirt defense with electronic water sensor or water barriers, they are different from what we see today with filter monitors. And their behavior at your operation is going to depend so much on the fuel quality that you've got at your location, right? Do you tend to have wet fuel or dirty fuel coming in from your supplier? Do you have, challenges with your hydrant system and the design of it that's, causing water buildup, et cetera? So there's a lot of different factors that can impact the usefulness of the different technologies at your location. One of the things that we've seen with the water barriers, unfortunately, is a proclivity to block up sooner than we would see with other filter technologies, right? So in essence, they're more efficient at filtering particulates than we've had historically, which in some ways is a good thing, right? We have cleaner fuel downstream of these filters, but it does mean that they tend to block up a bit faster than you would see with a corresponding filter monitor, for instance. And so you may not get a full 12-month service life out of a water barrier the way you do out of a filter monitor. But it's going to be so dependent on your fuel quality and your supply chain, how many fuelings you're doing a year, how much throughput you've got. So we really encourage folks to try it out in one or two vehicles first, get familiar with the technology, use it as an opportunity to train your team on some of the differences, get your segregated storage in place, have your transition plan set, and understand how the filters perform at your specific location before you go all in and say, let's change the whole fleet.
So Rob, it sounds like you guys built too good of a filter. It's filtering out stuff that you didn't anticipate, and it's reaching terminal DP too soon. Um, can you speak to that? What's happening there?
Yeah, that's it's a tough one, Steve. You know, this was new technology with a membrane that we tested in our lab with under lab conditions, and we felt that it was absolutely meeting all the performance requirements of removing water and dirt,
Hmm.
and at the same flow rates as a drop-in replacement. Unfortunately, like
Right.
we said, when you take it to the real world, we found out quickly that not all real world fuels are lab fuels. So,
Hmm.
but it's we keep using the word variable service life, Steve, because we've seen conditions where the cartridges will last quite a long time. We've seen conditions where the cartridges may not last as long. And again, going back to what Amy said, it all really depends on the location. If you have a large fleet and you're at an international airport, you may want to try it on 1, 2 vehicles and see if it is technology for you. The good thing is, and for small locations, we're not seeing that. We're seeing that for low throughput locations, these cartridges will give them the life expectancy that they had hoped, which is a minimum of a year, if
Hmm.
not longer. But they should get that 12 months or close to it. The good thing is that to try this technology doesn't take a lot of effort. It is a drop-in
Right.
solution that doesn't require a lot of additional work. So you'll buy some cartridges, you'll be aware of how they work and make sure everything is set on the vehicle. You'll plug them in, and then you'll able to try them and monitor them and see for yourself if it is a technology that's suited for that location.
And being so new to the market, the broader market beyond the field trials, you guys are still looking for feedback. Is that correct? I mean, you want to hear about experiences that users have. So for those in the audience, if you transition to water barrier filters, you can reach out to myself or to Amy or to Rob, any one of us. So we're happy to put you in touch with one another and uh, get that real world application. What are you guys experiencing? I think that's important, something to let the audience know about, right?
Absolutely. And we
Yes,
really encourage you guys to reach out. If you've got experiences, good, bad, ugly, we want to hear about them. It's a new technology. We've done a lot of testing on it. We feel confident that the filters perform the way that they're intended to. But, you know, somebody's always going to find, you build a better widget and someone's always going to find a new way to stress it that
Right.
you didn't think of before. So we want to make sure that any sort of anomalous stuff or any questions that you've got,
Right.
reach out, and we're happy to be a resource for you guys and to hear what the experience is out there.
That's exactly right. Well, I think it's a good time. We've got about 15 minutes left to open it up to the audience for Q&A. To those of you all listening and watching out there, like Jillian had said, if you want to use the raise your hand button, Jillian will turn on your microphone and you can address the panel and the broader audience at large. Don't be shy. There's no dumb questions. And if not, you can always type it. The anonymity of the keyboard is pretty powerful. So put your questions out there. I don't see any coming in right now. So rather than, I guess, kind of wait for dead air until those pop in, wait, here we go. We have one coming in right here. Great question. This one comes from Jason Saul of MaxQ Fuel. Could you confirm the compatibility of water barrier filters with fuel system icing inhibitor? If I heard correctly, Rob, they are fully compatible, right? No issues with fuel system icing inhibitor.
Yeah, that's correct, Steve. So we did some robustness testing when we qualified to the 1588, and we introduced the Fizzy, the anti-icing additive, into the fuel at quite higher levels. We also did some repetitive surfactancy testing as well too later on in the year, where we additized the fuel with I think it was 4 times more volume than what
Wow.
is regulated for anti-icing additive, and soaked and flow tested, and there was no issues whatsoever. So yes, this technology is approved for use with pre-blended fuel, anti-icing additive.
That is a huge win, especially for us in the GA market that had to move away from monitors. And gosh, was 2007 when they figured out not a good idea to use with fuel system icing inhibitor. So good news on that front. Let's see, no other questions coming in just yet. Thank you, Jason, for that question, by the way. While we wait for others, takeaways, high-level summaries, any parting words you guys want to leave the audience with before we close out?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things there, Steve. I know that the last time we did this NATA webinar, there was several questions on avgas and the compatibility of avgas with our water barrier filter. So I just wanted to touch back on that. We are looking to confirm the compatibility with avgas. We know that it's not going to be any different than jet fuel on the specification side. So a lot of the testing will incorporate some of the jet fuel specification tests. But we are introducing additional tests to confirm the compatibility of avgas with our water barrier filter. We are doing that relatively soon. A test plan has already been put in place. So you'll be hearing from us shortly on confirmation that our water barrier filter is.
Now, when you say confirmation, that's not EI qualification. That's just your own independent testing that you're looking to execute?
That's correct. That's more for something like the NATA and the users out there who use gas. It'll be more of a manufacturer's confirmation.
Right. And more of a formal notification, right? Because as I understood it, you've done some testing with avgas in the field and had success?
We have, but we didn't do any lab testing or any testing beyond that, just some field trial testing. So we just want to put that to rest and make sure that we dot all the I's, across all the T's on avgas so that everybody is reassured it's absolutely
all right. Great. We have another question coming in from Philip Barfield, wanting to know, are these inside out filters or outside in?
Well, we are only making them one way, and that is outside in. So they will, they'll drop into an existing fuel monitor housing 2-inch, and they will also in the future drop into a vessel that takes a 5 or 6 inch, but they all are outside inflow.
Good to know. Yeah, drop-in solution, right? They're going to match the existing, direction filter vessels that are out there.
If they're,
thank you, Philip.
Steve,
go ahead.
Sorry, just one last comment. If they are asking whether we're doing an inside out, it's probably because they may be using an inside out water absorbing cartridge right now. If that's the case, they may have converted a filter water separator and put in the inside out type. If they've done that, they need to really revert back to the filter water separator design, because there will be no equivalent drop-in for that.
Very good distinction, Rob. Yeah, the only reason you would have an inside out monitor to begin with is because you converted it, right, from a filter water separator. So basically go back to the original design, put the coalescers in with the separator, add a water defense if it's been removed, and then you are off and running. So another question coming in, this is one again from Jason Saul. Any further practices or SOPs to limit the similarity or confusion between monitors and barriers, part numbers, visual references? So, well, the part number is CDF versus CDF-X, right? So the new designator is the X on the end for the 2-inch. Okay. And colors of the end caps, same color? You plan on making them different colors? Like anything that, we couldn't go with the sleeve. Is there, any other solutions that you guys, might be providing soon?
Well, when we first looked at this, Steve, the idea of phasing out the SAP monitor was supposed to be a shorter term exercise than what we've seen now. And so we adopted with the CDF-X, the X meaning extreme. CDF, if anybody knows, means CDF stands for clean dry fuel. And that's been our trademark from the beginning when we developed the CDF cartridge. It means clean dry fuel CDF. So the X was, the extreme, and we had hoped that there would be a 1-for-1 conversion, when we first started this exercise, and that CDF and monitors would phase out and go away, and then people wouldn't even be able to order them or use them. Nameplates, everything would be changed, and people would be with the CDFX. Unfortunately, because there's overlap now, as Amy's mentioned also, we have to be careful and be able to distinguish the two. We are constantly looking at ways to try and distinguish between the two. We're using different packaging. We're using different markings on the ends of the cartridges. We are hoping that we can put some sort of striping, something on the sleeve of the cartridge that will give you a quick indication that it's a different cartridge.
And just to clarify, the end cap, it'll be stamped with the part number, right? It'll say CDFX on it. Okay.
That's correct. There's a date, there's the part number and a batch number on all the ends of each cartridge.
And Steve, to add on to that, I mean, we can't stress enough from a 103 perspective. I know we're here to talk about the water barriers today, but we also have included in the 103 the dirt defense filters cartridges with electronic water sensor, and those have no water removal capability whatsoever. But again, look identical to a monitor, look identical to a water barrier. So if you've got those in your operation because you've tried out that technology or you're using that technology, it's really important that you don't end up inadvertently installing those into a vessel that doesn't have the electronic water sensor, because otherwise any water that's present in your fuel is just going directly to the aircraft and obviously causing a pretty unsafe operating condition.
Yeah, that's a good point. So not just the water barrier filters, but also the dirt defense filters, right? Those look very similar. So
they look identical.
They look identical. So number one, knowing what you order, knowing where you store it, keeping it separately. But lastly, and more importantly, I would like to think, I know those are dangerous words, but if you're qualified to change filter elements, you would know to be looking for these things. But that's why we have these conversations, right? To let people know it has happened before. I mean, literally in the field trials, it got mixed up. So if it can happen, it will happen. And, we'll hopefully try to prevent it through, venues like this and different, marketing and outreach and those sort of things.
To your point about you had asked about NCAP, Steve, and I just wanted to address that real quick. A4A has put in a formal request to the EI to look at different NCAP colorings, but it's going to be a really tall order because of the electrostatic charge requirements that the airframe OEMs have imposed upon us to not overcharge the fuel while we're fueling, right? And so you need that black, the carbonaceous material to have that element be conductive enough so that you are not generating a charge in your fuel as it's going through the filter. And so that's one of the other very difficult things. You couldn't just say, okay, let's make this one yellow and this one pink and that one green, because then they wouldn't be able to conduct enough static charge to be safe for the airframes.
Amy, thank you so much for clarifying that. I know that seems like one of those things, and I've been guilty of it myself in the past, of going, why don't they just change it? It's not that simple. There's so many detailed specifications that go into EI qualification. Like, to your point, I mean, it's taken, 5-6 years now on this road from, all right, we're moving this way to here we are, and hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of hours and I don't know how many dollars, but lots of them to get us to this point. So not as always as easy as just change it. There's a lot that goes into it. So I appreciate you clarifying that. One other question has come in, really kind of highlighting the difference in the physical nature of a filter water separator versus a monitor filter, and how a filter water separator has that bowl traditionally where water can drain into. Wanting to know, this question comes from Mohammed Radi, if there's any concerns putting these water barrier filters going to that monitor vessel that doesn't have that sump drain. Can you speak to that, Rob?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stephen. One we've been asked several times in the past months and years. Our stance on it is that typically for mobile fueling and into plane fueling at the skid of the aircraft, there shouldn't be a lot of water. You shouldn't be getting slugs of water, but it's not to say that you can't. But you really shouldn't be. So the water is usually very minimal. And the way the vessel is designed, although there's no sump at the bottom of the vessel, there is quite a bit of area below the cartridges that will accumulate water. If you're accumulating more water than that per day, because you'll be doing, daily drains, then the issue is even bigger than what what the concern is. So there's enough void underneath the cartridges at the bottom of the vessel where you can simply drain it at the low point. And the other thing too is, we have sumped our vessels, and because unlike the monitors or filter separators, if water does start to rise and touch the cartridge, this cartridge is tested where water will not pass. Even if the vessel is flooded with water, this media does not allow the water to pass. So there's, not to use as an excuse, you really do need to make sure the water is drained every day. But there is quite a bit of area underneath the cartridges that will collect that water that doesn't require a sump. In the future, we may look at redesigning monitors to add a small sump, but right now we don't think it's necessary.
And Steve, I should add, in the field trial, none of the vehicles that we trialed it in had any modifications to the filter vessel done whatsoever. So none of these filter vessels had that typical bowl sump that you'll see on a filter water separator vessel. These were monitor vessels from the beginning. So they have, obviously a slight slope just for draining and a drain valve for being able to do filter changes. But nothing else was done to these vessels to make them usable for the field trial or for the water barrier. And the other question that I've gotten is about that. Obviously you have water upstream of the filter. You don't necessarily have a positive sump, so you may not always get every single drop of water out of that vessel every morning. We did an extensive amount of testing looking for microbial growth as well. And we haven't seen any evidence at this point that microbial growth is an issue either with the elements or with the amount of water that you would accumulate, from one day to the next. So I want to stress that we didn't make any modifications to the vessels for the purposes of the field trial. And from a 103 perspective, there's no requirement to do any modification to the vessel.
Well, thank you for those thorough answers. I think that pretty much covered it. Let's see, anything else coming in? So I have seen no more questions, no hands flying up out there, and it is 2:58. So I think this is a pretty good time to put a button on it. Mohammed says, thank you for answering that question. And thank you, Mohammed, for asking it. And thank you to everybody else out there for attending today's webinar. Just as a reminder, there will be a recording of this put together. You'll get it within the next 24 hours or so. And then please reach out to us. You can reach myself at safety first, that's safety, the number 1ST at nata.aero.aero, or Rob and Amy. I should have put your emails up on the screen, but if not, reach out to me. I'm also sberry, SBERRY, at nata.aero, and I'd be happy to field your questions or put you in touch with Amy or Rob or do whatever we can to answer everything that's out there as you guys start to transition to this new filtration technology. And again, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Steve.
Welcome. Thank you.
Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.